running back 3, running back 4. Now, Cordero Patterson is easily the favorite to be the running back 3 this season. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. If he doesn't win the kick return job, which Calvin Austin said he wants to be part of the kick return this year, he's eyeing to win that job as well. If Cordero Patterson is not the starting kick returner, I'm not saying it's 100% guaranteed that he makes the 53-man roster. And I'm not saying that it's a long shot by no means. I mean, it's Cordero Patterson. He's an all-pro. This dude's been doing it forever, but he's 33 years old. He came into OTAs not ready to go. He should come into training camp ready to go, but you just never know. You got guys like Jonathan Ward, Aaron Shumklin, Dejon Edwards, and LaMichael Pirine who could come in here and make some noise. You got a couple of candidates. The Steelers could also keep 4 guys. Now, this is my prediction for how this one lays out, and I'm interested to see if you think I'm a little bit crazy with this assumption. I'm interested to see if all you guys think I'm a little bit crazy with this assumption or this prediction. I predict that Cordero does make the roster, but I also predict that the Pittsburgh Steelers find a way to keep not 1, but 2 more guys. They keep Jack Coletto, which would be their 4th. They make Cordero Patterson more of a wide receiver than an actual running back. And from there, they take or keep Dejon Edwards on their roster because they feel this guy is going to make some impact. And I think that he's got a ton of potential. People want to compare him to Jaylen Warren. I think it's way too early for that, but I do think the Steelers want to keep a fullback. I think Jack Coletto is the name to watch this season. And Dejon Edwards is the dude that they might hope turns into the next backup running back, where they look at it and just say, this guy could work next year when Najee's not around anymore, so we could keep him. Cordero Patterson could also be that guy, but at 34 years old, at some point, running backs don't have the juice anymore. I think it's easier to play wide receiver the older that you get, and Cordero might be making that transition to like a slot gadget guy where he's just all around. He's a Connor Hayward, and you keep 2 of those Connor Hayward type guys. It definitely knocks off the wide receivers that they keep, but at the same time, adds some boosted potential to the running back room. I'm saying Jack Coletto, Dejon Edwards, they make the roster over Jonathan Ward. LaMichael Pirine didn't look good at all during minicamp, so that one's a little bit And Aaron Shumklin, who was my guy at one point during OTAs, but I just think Edwards is going to edge him out.
Yeah, whenever you initially started mentioning Edwards, whenever they initially signed him right after the NFL draft, I think everybody looked at that and said, wow, Georgia's starting running back from last year. That's a name that immediately brings pedigree to that competition. And you mentioned Pirine. It was funny. I forgot Pirine. I was listing all the players, all the running backs, and I was like, oh yeah, Michael Pirine. He's here. He's here. He's maybe not for long, but still. No, going into training camp, Aaron
disrespect.
I'm sorry. Better athlete than I will ever be.
No doubt. Super Bowl champion. Super Bowl champion.
So
you're not wrong, though. You're not wrong. You're lucky I'm the one going to training camp. Thank you.
Exactly. I mean, I'm safe here behind the screen, but no, sorry, LaMichael. But still, looking at the running back situation, I feel like Dejon Edwards has the highest upside, and especially coming off of an organization like the Georgia Bulldogs, who has produced so much NFL talent. I feel like that gives him a head up on some of these other guys, even though they've been in on the NFL teams before. They've been through NFL training camps before. I feel like Georgia prepares these guys in a unique way. You talked to Broderick Jones all last year, and he talked about, listen, this is nothing new for us because Kirby Smart runs Georgia like an NFL program. I think Dejon Edwards, with his pedigree, with his capabilities, what he showed in college, and the fact that he's coming out of Georgia, I like him to be on the roster at the end of training camp.
Yep, me too. I think he's a sleeper to watch. And we'll dive into sleepers before training camp actually kicks off on Thursday, but name to watch, I think, this year. And take that with a grain of salt, because last year, 2 years ago, I took what's his name out of Duke over Jaylen Warren. I'm not even going to remember his name, but this guy's it. This guy's going to be the guy. He's going to impress a lot of people. Jaylen Warren turned out to be the greatest thing the Steelers have seen in a long time. So, I'm not always right, but this one I feel pretty good about. I do feel pretty good about it. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Have you ever found yourself scrolling on social media, maybe spending too much time on whatever platform you're addicted to and thinking, man, why am I feeling down? Why do I find myself not finding the joy that social media is supposed to give me? That's because comparison is the thief of joy. and it's easy to envy other people's lives. But therapy can help. It can help you focus on what you want instead of what other people have, so you can start living your best life. I'm somebody who's advocated for therapy for a long time. You constantly see me wearing the sweatshirt. Going to therapy is cool. I've reaped the benefits for years, and I think everybody who's thinking about it should add that to their agenda as well, because in one way or another, it's very helpful. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/allsteelers today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/allsteelers. Wide receiver 2, the most talked about position for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They got a list of candidates: Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, Marquez Callaway, Dez Fitzpatrick. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. You could say an outside guy if you want to say an outside guy. I think for me, I'll ignore the potential of a Brandon Ayuk, although Friday's coming real fast, people, or a Cortland Sutton or a John Mechie, or people love to say DK Metcalf, those types of guys. I'll go in-house on this one. The easy favorite in my eyes is Calvin Austin. This is a guy that should win this battle, that should take a pretty significant step forward, that Russell Wilson is saying reminds him of Tyler Lockett, which is massive. He's working out with George Pickens and Deontay Johnson's route running coach. He's working out with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields during the offseason. He just seems like a guy who's taken a step forward, who's ready to contribute to this team in 2024. And I think he's going to get the opportunity to be the wide receiver 2. I think he has the most upside of anybody on the roster when it comes to that position, and the Steelers are going to try to utilize it. I think he could play the outside as well, so that's pretty big for the Steelers. And with Roman Wilson also being capable of playing both, that's a good 1-2-3 punch, with maybe a guy like Van Jefferson coming off the bench and supplying some outside help as well. But Calvin Austin is my pick. I think one of the biggest sleepers on this roster this training camp, and somebody who could take a massive step forward. Also, friend of the show, which also gives him a benefit, always gives him the benefit of the doubt and a little boost in these rankings.
Yeah, I'm very bullish on Calvin Austin going into this season. I think that he only showed very slight glimpses of his top capabilities last year, but simply because he wasn't used in the proper ways. I think he'll be used in the proper ways by Arthur Smith, and I think everybody in that Steelers organization and then in that building has recognized the ceiling that Calvin Austin has, and the fact that he has not showed that really at all on Sundays. Very, very minimal amounts of times have you seen Calvin Austin be what he truly can be. So I'm bullish on him. I think that, to me, I would bet on him being the number 2 at the end of training camp. It feels like going into it, it's the same thing we talked about yesterday with Zach Frazier. It's the same thing we talked about yesterday with Troy Fautanu, is they're going to put a veteran in front of him and they're going to make him earn it. So I think that it's Van Jefferson going into camp in that pole position, but I do think by the end of camp, if I had to predict, it's going to be Calvin Austin.
Yep, I think it'll play out the exact same way. That's how it's going to go down. Is Calvin Austin will have to earn his place, but he will earn his place. The best part is, so during the Matt Canada era, you saw glimpses of practice, and it's hilarious because as people who stood on the sidelines, you said it time and time again, and maybe I'll get in trouble for saying this. Who cares? There were a lot of moments where they would run a play in practice over the last 2 years where you'd go, that was nice. They're not going to run that in the game. They're not even going to think about running that in the game. Calvin Austin would execute on a lot of those plays. A lot of plays that you would go, that was a nice play. That was well designed. Can't believe they just did that. Calvin Austin looked real good there. I know they're not going to run that in a game. So hopefully that turns into they run it into a game, and I think Calvin Austin's going to look good. Let's guess the 5 wide receivers that make the Pittsburgh Steelers roster, because this is also a pretty big question. There are a lot of candidates. We just named pretty much every single one of them. I'll give you my 5 that I expect to make the Steelers roster by the end of the season, or by the end of training camp, excuse me. That is George Pickens, obviously. And again, we will stay away from outside guys because that's a possibility. But if they don't make it, we'll predict the guys that are on the roster currently. I will go George Pickens, Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, Scotty Miller, and Van Jefferson are my 5 to make the roster, with Cordero Patterson and Connor Hayward kind of being those 6th, 7th-ish guys for the Steelers. Allows them to keep a running back and a fullback, and then that'll rock with tight end with Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington. Your thoughts?
I think there's 4 guys that are likely, if not locks. There are 3 locks here. That is George Pickens, Calvin Austin, and Roman Wilson. I think you could probably pencil in Van Jefferson. You scared me for a second there because you went Scotty Miller before you said Van Jefferson. I was like, is this guy really going to leave Van Jefferson off? I'd be surprised. But those are the 4 that I think are pretty likely to end up being on the 53-man roster, if not locks. That last spot is a tough one. You've mentioned Scotty Miller on a handful of occasions. I'm keeping my eye on Dez Fitzpatrick because, similar to what you mentioned earlier about David Perales, Dez Fitzpatrick was a player that surprised everybody last summer during all the summer stuff. He came in, didn't make the roster, but stayed in Pittsburgh all year long and then came back and re-signed this year. I think going into a season where, listen, that 5th spot is definitely up for grabs, more so than it was last year and more so than it's probably been for a long time. Dez Fitzpatrick's a guy that I think coming into this season is well-liked in that room. And if he can put that work together in the next couple of weeks, there's not anybody of massive stature standing in his way. So I'm keeping my eye on Dez Fitzpatrick. And if not Dez, there's something about Quez Watkins. He wasn't that impressive this summer, but there's something about Quez Watkins. Whenever they signed him, whenever they brought him in, they made a lot of noise and they made a big deal out of signing Quez Watkins when none of us really understood why. To me, there's just something in the back of my head that says there's a reason that they like Quez Watkins that much.
There could be. There very well could be. Both of those guys will come down to the thing with Van Jefferson is he's a gunner. He could play special teams. Both of those guys are going to have to prove that they could play special teams. That's why Dez Fitzpatrick didn't stick on the roster last year, is because he couldn't play special teams. He's got to be able to do that because he's a hell of a talent on offense. That guy's a 4th-round pick. He was a stud at Louisville. And probably should have made the Titans roster, but I've heard some iffy reports on him just not being able to grasp the playbook. If he could come into Pittsburgh this summer and prove it, I do. I agree with you. I think he's got all the talent. I think he's the biggest sleeper. Quez Watkins would be a good one. I think he carries I think he carries more upside than Van Jefferson. That being said, I think the safer pick for me is still Van Jefferson.